All right, so despite the fact that everything in this class is built around the Department of Financial Services, believe it or not, we're not going to have that much to highlight here because half of the stuff on this page is complete garbage and irrelevant to the test. True story, man. Come on. If that was, you know why I can say that? Because if it wasn't true, it would be called defamation, right? I'd be spreading untrue rumors about somebody, but I'm right here in the book. I'm chopping it up. I'm verifying the fact that it's garbage. So therefore I can say it and it's not considered, what's that word again? Defamation. Don't call anyone's baby ugly. This class is easy, all right? That's actually one of the unfair trade practices. That's going to be a question on the exam, right? Just like coercion. Coercion, we think about, you're bullying somebody. Yeah, no hard closing tactics, okay? It's everything is persuade through involvement. So we're on page 403. Chapter 26.2, Department of Financial Services. I want you to highlight that headline. Okay? Now, the reason that above that, the only thing that you have highlighted here is issuing certificates of authority. Do me a favor. Put a little arrow next to that. OIR. Just put the abbreviation there, right? Because the Office of Insurance Regulations, the headline is actually on the other page. And so if you're at that top bullet point right there, just put a little arrow because this is all about you being able to get to your page and your brain go directly into recall. I don't want you to have to remember the last segment. So the reason you do that is I told you in the last video that that was the most important job that the Office of Insurance Regulation has, right? Look at this opening line here. Don't highlight Department of Financial Services because you already did the headline, but issues and regulates agent and agency licenses. So let's pause there real quick because the OIR issues certificates of authority. It's like an agent agency license. Do you see the parallels right there? So the Office of Insurance Regulations that only deals with insurance companies issues certificates of authority. The Department of Financial Services issues licenses and authorizations. We'll get to that other word, authorizations, but I just wanted to draw the parallels that to express how important it is. Look where they are. They're transitioning from one power to the next. We cut out the rest because it's easier for you to see that making sure everyone qualifies to be engaged in the business of insurance is the number one, and that's why they both open there like that. Now here's a little bit of redundancy. I love it, right? Skip over the Department of Financial Services is in the second line and then just highlight, headed by the Chief Financial Officer. Okay? Now, I told you I don't really do much crossing out. It's all in this section is because this section is a crime against logic, all right? This next line right here, don't highlight this. Let me show you why we're getting rid of it. The Office of Insurance Regulations regulates insurer activities. Together, the department and office oversee the insurance industry in accordance with the provisions of the insurance code. Hey, we are never going to discuss insurers and consumers in the same sentence because we are being tested on who regulates insurers and who regulates consumers. In that, did you see how they kind of merged them together right there? I want you to cross that entire garbage sentence out. You're going to cross out the Office of Insurance Regulation regulates insurer activities. And then next sentence, I want you to cross out. Together, the department and office oversee the insurance industry in accordance with the provisions of the insurance code. And then I also want you to cross out those next two words, members of. The only entity that has members is the commission. That's it. We will never use the word member for anything except the commission, and that's how you're going to do it. And every time we see this come up and they use an improper word like, we're crossing this out, it's not right for us to discuss all of the people who regulate the industry before we make sure that you're comfortable with knowing that only the commission that has no customer service whatsoever regulates banks and lenders. Do you care if the banks, like Bank of America and Humana, United Healthcare, and all these, do you care if they get customer service from the state? No, do what you're supposed to do. We're going to point our fingers at you the whole time, and we're going to complain. We're going to Karen the hell out of this. Anytime you don't pay my claim, I'm running straight to the Department of Financial Services. Why? Because what we're about to find out in the next flip side of the page is where the Division of Consumer Services is, right? That's where if there was a violation, and let's just say it was against an agency, the Department of Financial Services covers it, right? Because let's just say it was me, Florida man, right? You know the Florida man did it. We're going to find out how they do investigations when it involves a real person, right? On this other side right here, we'll talk about how investigations are done when it involves a business. But can you see that you would treat those two differently? Would you send an investigator after somebody like me? It's maybe a little bit wackier, you know, maybe not stuck in compliance officer world, but would you send somebody who investigates somebody who's just committed bank fraud or someone who's just committed insurance fraud? We're going to go all through what these investigators go through. Last year at these clinics in Boca Raton, everybody's running around all bougie and pretty down there. Yeah, they ripped off like $200 million out of like 2 clinics down there. These people are crazy, crazy. If you had $200 million, tell me you might not shoot back, right? You get out of here. You're going to try to get on my big boat. Like, you don't want me to be a criminal. I'm telling you right now, you better be happy I'm a compliance officer. Anyway, let's go ahead and skip back past all that garbage. We crossed out member because only the commission has members. We crossed out the others because we will never commingle, neither will the state. They will never combine an insurer and consumer question. They are completely different. Now this next line is actually interesting, okay? The way I want you to highlight it, I want you to highlight right after it, the department. Reason being is because remember when we talked about the Financial Services Commission on the page prior, you underlined the word commission in the headline. Can you go up to the headline of your Department of Financial Services and you can circle, it's already kind of underlined, but if you circle department, that's where that's the main abbreviation that they're going to give you. So if they're not talking about Department of Financial Services, they're just going to say the department. That can show up that way on the test. It's not considered an abbreviation. The abbreviations would be DFS, and I used to freak out, man. I'd be like, they gave me all these abbreviations. You understand? I'm so glad I'm not dating. I couldn't remember somebody's name or phone number if you tried to force it down, right? So then you give me all these acronyms. I don't get it. Commission is what you need to remember. Department is what you need to remember. And the only acronym that you really need to hold on to is CFO. You see what I mean? All right. So here, the department. Right after, I want you to highlight quasi-legislative, rulemaking, and quasi-judicial powers. Let me just tell you, they didn't even almost try to explain those two, okay? Like, in other words, they think that old school video from back in the days, like I'm talking my days, right? Schoolhouse Rock, where that dude was all wrapped up and he was a bill and he's sitting on the thing. He's like, I am only a bill and I'm sitting on Capitol Hill. That right there, quasi-legislative powers. A bill is something that a lawmaker proposes to the state to try to make, in the CFO's instance, he's in charge of the insurance industry, right? So he proposes bills to the state of Florida, the legislature there, that they vote on to become laws. I am only a bill. That is quasi-legislative power. If you can remember that I am only a bill discusses quasi-legislative power, the only thing that they can do there to confuse you is talk about quasi-judicial. Do judges make laws? No. only interpret the laws, and if we're talking about criminal, they impose penalties, correct? So what this is saying, let's break up this word real quick. Quasi. Everybody know what quasi means? It means kinda, doesn't it? So he doesn't have legislative powers. Legislative power means that he can make a law. He kinda has legislative powers, which means he can make suggestions to the state government that would potentially be voted into law. Now, with this quasi-judicial power, I kind of need to back up a little bit, because we're actually in Department of Financial Services right now, and you hear how they're talking about the department having this power. I'm talking about the CFO having the power. If I have an office and I tell Stephanie to go do something within the office, does she not have all of my authority? She does. That's why they talk about this. Up here, when they talk about members of the department, the reason we crossed it out is because I just want you to understand, the department has 13 divisions, right? 6 of those divisions have something directly to do with the business of insurance. Doesn't it make sense that those divisions have the authority of their boss? Okay, so I'm going to use that interchangeably, Department of Financial Services and CFO, as can you. So remember earlier when I asked you that question, Steph, about who regulates banks, who regulates insurers and stuff, you said Financial Services Commission. I said that's correct. Second level would be Office of Insurance Regulations. Same thing here. The CFO could also be an answer. Now, I do want to point out, in this instance, so if everything we're talking about the department, just like the commission would be the right answer for banks and lenders, for anything dealing with agents, agencies in the marketplace, CFO or Department of Financial Services both work. So a little bit of interchanging, that's the only time that this ever gets a little confusing, but it doesn't if you understand what their roles are, right? So the quasi-judicial powers means that the CFO can actually hold hearings, okay? So let's just say I did something wrong and it was criminal, okay? There's a lot of things you could do criminal. Like, we're going to learn about types of policies here, and we're going to learn about Medicare. Well, in Medicare, you have all these different little parts. If you sell somebody the wrong product, which is really hard to do, but it's like over-insuring them. Can you imagine? It's like predatory. Old people don't know any of these things. We come in and tell them that's what they need, that's what they buy, right? So some of those violations are criminal. Not having proper authorization, not being licensed, and conducting the business of insurance is a third-degree felony. So in these instances, what quasi-judicial power means is that, let's just say, you were busted for selling the insurance without a proper license, right? The CFO doesn't have to send you to the circuit court, right? Because the circuit court's what we know here. Someone does something wrong, you get arrested, you get processed, go to jail, they give you your dub, blah, blah, blah. You go to court, you see the judge, you got your attorneys and everything. What quasi-judicial means is that the CFO has complete power over the business of insurance. He can hold the hearing, show you your evidence, and give you what would be called a consent order. You could, if it was me, he could say, Jason, you were conducting business without the proper authorization. That's a third-degree felony. Here's my evidence. I can either send this to the local circuit court, and you can face them, and it's carrying like up to a 5-year penalty per infraction, or you can enter into this consent order, give up your license, and pay this fine, but you can't conduct a business of insurance anymore. If you do, and we find out that you sold something else, you violated the consent order, which is automatic guilt. He's throwing the book at you, okay? But he can't send you to prison. The CFO can give you the option to give up your license, the option to pay the fine, and avoid going to the circuit court and having to go through the criminal justice system, right? It's like it's basically, it's not exactly a slap on the wrist, but it is in comparison to going to prison, right? So right there, they don't really discuss that anywhere, and they don't explain that very well. But do you understand what I mean there by the quasi? Quasi is kinda. Legislative, if you can't remember what legislative was, and this is how I did it, okay, because sometimes I used to forget this. I remember that it was quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial. It was real easy to remember that judges don't make the laws. So just in a lot of these things that we're doing, it's very easy to remember the one that gravitates towards you, that you remember, and then the other one is by default. It's never going to be something drastically different. Does that make sense? All right. So let's go into these bullet points down here. We're not going to highlight a lot of these bullet points because if I told you I was the alpha and omega, that means I could do whatever the hell I want, right? Exactly. So the rest of these pages right here are nothing more than listing out all the CFO and the Department of Financial Services Authority. I'm telling you, dude is the alpha and omega. So can he do investigations? Yup. Can the people in the department do investigations? Yup. What about over there in the Financial Services Commission? Yup. What about changing paperwork? I don't like what this says. Change it. They tell you to change it, change it. There's nothing they can't do. All these bullet points here is, oh, they have the right to broadcast information to the marketplace. No shit, Sherlock. Of course they do. They're state regulators. Their job is to send out information, right? When we go into the next section, when we actually start telling the stories and stuff and going in and trying to really drum this stuff in, because they gave me 9.6 hours to talk about this, and I swear to you, it's going to take me like 3 hours to get through it, and then I'm going to repeat it twice. So in these first bullet points, look at this. I don't want you to highlight general powers and duties because I think this section is like, duh. All right. In that first bullet point, I don't want you to highlight anything, but enforce the insurance code. I don't know if you know this or not. That just means law. The word code means law. When I first started doing this, I was all traumatized because I'm over here trying to outline this book, and I'm a marketing guy, right? I'm not all, legal. I mean, just because I'm a compliance officer doesn't mean I'm like all right? So I'm over here, I'm studying this book, and then I come across the Agent Code of Ethics, right? And that's just like his outline of how agents are supposed to interact. And so it was there. I looked at it. It said the Agent Code of Ethics. Then I get to this section. And what's crazy is that, have you noticed that I started you in section 26? What kind of crime against logic is that, right? No, I'm the correct one. The state is wrong. We should be starting with this because right up until now, even when you get licensed, you're the consumer. Do you not want to know how to protect yourself? I tell everybody, man, if you don't know what your rights are, you don't have them, all right? Don't come up on somebody like me that knows what my rights are, coming up thinking, I think I got rights. I got you. You're going to do whatever I say. Anyway, insurance code is nothing more than law. I looked for 2 hours for a definition of code and didn't understand why they kept taking it back to law until really I figured out that was just, that's just my personal trauma, all right? So I just make sure that housekeeping-wise, you don't have to highlight that, but they enforce the insurance code. Means the Department of Financial Services enforces all insurance laws with the power of the CFO. Look at this second one. You don't need to highlight this either, but when I tell you that this dude is the alpha and omega, check this out. Powers and authority may be expressed or implied. That means you are not splitting hairs with the CFO. You can express it, meaning you can see it in the law, or the interpretation falls on the hand that the interpretation of the law falls in the favor of the consumer. So express or implied, you have to think about this, right? Like, when the hell would we do something illegal to a client for X, Y, or Z, right? So with this here, it's literally designed so that way a criminal cannot wiggle around a loophole or something like that. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. If the CFO and their investigators spot you, you're done. You're done. All right. This next third one is the one I want you to highlight. Conduct any investigation. Highlight that. That is it. If I tell you they can conduct any investigation, do I need to list the type of investigations they conduct? That is it. Any. Now, I want to point out from that word any, when it comes to a test, Stephanie, any is a bad word on a test. Okay? Because what the test will do is they'll give you an answer. Think of, off the top of your head, how many times can you use the word any in that type of an extreme and it actually seriously applies to every? Because any means every. Extremes are bad. So when you're looking through the test and you're looking at bullet points and they're, A, B, C, or D, let the word any, all, and all of those other extremes jump out to you immediately, because 8, 9 times out of 10, that is the wrong answer unless the question is worded from the standpoint of what the consumer gets. Because the consumer, the person, the policy owner, sometimes has those, things that we have to do for them, right? So anytime this happens, they get it. That is the only time that word any or only or must happens. If the question is structured, asking a question on how we interact with the client, and it says, well, the client must. Absolutely not. That is never the answer. The client can do whatever the heck they want to do. Okay? We cannot force the client to do anything. That's just like one of those note to self when you're taking this exam with the state. Absolutes and extremes. Think about this. I'm your agent. We're sitting down. I'm explaining to you your options on how to minimize the financial risk associated with accidents, injuries, and death. And I tell you, you have to do something. Get out of here. You got to do something. You don't want to sit across from me and tell me I got to do something, because then I got to figure out a way to not do it for some reason. But we're not here to talk about my deficiencies. So look, conduct any investigation. I just want to point out, you don't need this, but look, determine if the person violated the code. What's the code? Law. If they conduct an investigation, didn't the first thing you do go to is like some criminal, CSI, law and order type stuff? All right, so just remember that. The next bullet point, look guys, you can run through these. These bullet points are completely irrelevant. I don't need you to highlight anything else. The second one from the bottom, the department and office may each employ actuaries. I don't even know what actuaries do, guys. So like, it's over there. It doesn't matter. If I don't know it, I can tell you it's not on the test. But if the CFO's job is to manage the entire business of insurance, and this is his office, if he needed an actuary, don't you think it's safe to assume he can hire the actuary? If he had to broadcast something because there was a consumer alert, don't you think that his offices have the right to broadcast it? So that's why we're not going to jump all over this. Flip to the next page. Now, check this out. You don't have to highlight this either, but that first bullet point, I kind of like it, because when I was telling you that it's not Big Brother is watching you, no, like that, like I'm pointing at my little sister saying Big Brother is watching. I'm used to talking about the state and whatnot. But that first bullet point, don't highlight this. They shall, within existing resources, develop and implement an outreach program to encourage the entry of additional insurers into the Florida market. You're killing me. Do you know what they just said there? All they had to say is that the state of Florida, do you know that CFO and the Office of Insurance Regulations and the Department of Financial Services actually is marketing to insurance companies to get them, and banks, to get them to conduct business in the state of Florida. That's all they said there. This is why we're chopping everything up. Did you know that the state of Florida is always trying to attract businesses to the state of Florida? I used to live over in California for a little while. They got In-N-Out Burger. CFO last year, when they always that political thing between California, who sucks and just has good beaches and stuff, and Florida that rocks and still has good beaches and stuff. It's just we're a little flat, right? It's kind of, even that works because California's a little up and down with their broke asses right now. But we're not doing a Florida license, so a California license, so we can talk that trash. But anyway, the CFO was inviting In-N-Out Burger to Florida to open up a business over here. And I was like, oh my God, you just go with that, because In-N-Out Burger is great. Anyway, just remember, These elected officials are here to make sure that we have a strong marketplace. Everything we're discussing is for consumer confidence, all right? Next bullet point, I just want you to highlight send legal process. All right? That just means that, remember I told you they have that quasi-judicial powers. They can, request information from you, blah, blah, blah. But what they can't do is force you to show up. Like if the courts, the circuit court says, yo, you better show up on the 5th, and you don't show up on the 5th, they'll issue a warrant for your arrest for failure to appear. The CFO can summons you, can fine you, can ask for records and do all those things, but cannot arrest you. But I'm telling you right now, you do something that's arrestable, they just have to hand it over, and then the state comes and picks you up, all right? But send legal process, so that's to the offender. Now in this instance right here, remember, DFS is all consumers, no insurers whatsoever. Now, this next bullet point, they completely missed the point here too, all right? So on this, but we have to highlight some things here. So highlight in that first line, receive complaints from consumers. What do we know that to be? Steph, what department do you call to take... Thank you. So this right here, what they failed to identify is that this is the Division of Consumer Services, is one of the 13 divisions underneath the Department of Financial Services. But just think about that connection there, right? Consumer Services, Department of Financial Services, you got those hand in hand, right? So this is, you got that, receive complaints from consumers, and then I want to drop down 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down, dead center. Department, and then skip another line and go to the beginning of the next line. May impose an administrative penalty for failure to, and go to next line down, respond in writing, and then right under writing, concerning a consumer complaint. All right. Now, in that margin right there, just like on the page prior where you wrote member in the margin, here, I want you to write Division of Consumer Services in the margin. That is super important because we're about to learn about their investigative powers, right? And what they just identified here is they may impose an administrative penalty. Well, I'm about to tell you that on the next page, we're going to learn about their law enforcement rights, okay? So the reason I want you to put Division of Consumer Services is because here, when you get your license, man, we all heard the stories about, Barbecue Becky and Karens and these people who complain for everything, right? Don't you think that those people absolutely lose it the moment that they have this, God forbid, a what if moment? They go to use their insurance. They haven't used it in a long time, or let's just say they're broke. Come on, it's very possible, I'm not supposed to say things like this, but if you're not new to sales, buyers are liars, okay? If somebody is having a financial issue, they'll throw you under the bus way before they accept their financial shortfallings, right? I bring this up because here we're talking about respond to consumer complaints in writing. Just because the Department of Financial Services reaches out to you does not mean that there's an investigation open. I've opened this class up talking about nothing but the Consumer Services Division and how the CFO being elected works for us, right? So step one is not to point their finger at you. Step one, the Division of Consumer Services is actually trying to resolve all problems before there's an issue within 30 days. So when they talk about this in writing, I'm going to drum this part in. The request from Consumer Services, they are trying to resolve the problem in 30 days, which means when they contact us, we have to respond in writing in 20 days. I don't need you to add that 20 days here. You could. I don't need you to, because in the next section we'll identify it, but they also did a very poor job of making that distinction, okay? Because everything else that comes from the Department of Financial Services is 30 days. Okay? 30 days is the number. The 20 days is because Karen asked the question. And all they want you to do is make sure they understand what she potentially got wrong in this discussion. All right? Now, if her complaint is valid, we're going to get into that. So just make sure that in this section right here, you have written on the side, Division of Consumer Services, because this is just one of the 6 divisions of the Department of Financial Services that have something to do with the business of insurance. Now, I want you to highlight the whole last bullet point. Florida licensed insurers must designate the CFO as their attorney to receive service of all legal process issued against them in any Florida civil action. It's crazy because that actually doesn't even belong there. The reason that they're going about it, they got these guys right here, both of them, like coughing in unison. You might as well just get it out. Oh my God.
Holding that in for like 5 minutes.
So there's going to be no class in 3 days because I just freaking got COVID from my little sister and my millennial over here, right? So
allergies.
I got them over here. I got this directional mic on. They're in the background. They're like, Stephanie's over here, like her hair is like popping like a Muppet, like blap, blap, blap. All right. So, but that last bullet point, when you highlight that last bullet point there, that should not have been over there under the CFO when you first opened it up. Why is it under the department? Because the CFO is El Jefe, and the department takes care of everything for him. That department it's got 13 divisions in it. It's like he's an octopus with 13 tentacles, some kind of superhuman power, right? So, David, where am I at on time?
32 minutes.
All right. In the next video, we're not going to go to the next video yet. I'm just going to finish it. So deal with it. All right. Jump down to 2622, policyholders' rights, because here we're just going to highlight a few things before we jump into some of the divisions. On this, look at that first bullet point. I want you to highlight right to competitive pricing. Second one down, right to obtain comprehensive coverage. Third one, right to advertising that provides accurate and balanced information on benefits and limitations. Next bullet point, right to an insurance company that is financially stable. Skip the next bullet point down, honest. I mean, come on, hello. We'll get into this, but we were talking about agent code of ethics too. We represent the best interests of the consumer, okay? And throughout this, one of the things that I'm going to drum into your head is that you can lose your license for being untrustworthy. You do not have to commit a crime to lose your license. We receive personally identifying information from our clients. We know their worst fear because the fear of dying usually trumps everything, all right? So we're put in a position of trust. It makes us a fiduciary. That's actually a key word, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So, but yes, honest and trustworthy, but you don't have to highlight that because that's a given. Most people don't get into a new career trying to be suspect, all right? And then that next bullet point, the right to a readable policy. That's like earlier on I was telling you that everything in this class is going to be very black and white. You see here, right to a readable policy, competitive pricing. They want to make sure that there's no big swings. They want to make sure that you understand that you're paying for services, not brands. You can't come in and have the Tiffany's of healthcare. If it's comprehensive, it has to have all of these things. If it's basic, it has to identify the minimums and the limits. So all this is saying is that from a consumer right, you have the right to be able to understand what you are buying without having to take a class or get some kind of crazy degree. And that's all we're going to do for the rest of this class is I'm going to make it that simple. This is the law, and we're able to cut this back. You see it includes everything, right? little silly things like that. So in the next section, we're going to start talking about the divisions.